In the heart of a vast, dusty junkyard, an alien mother and her young daughter struggled to survive. The ground was scattered with scraps of metal, broken machinery, and wrecked ships. Their names were Zyla and Lyra. They were the last survivors of their kind on this war-torn planet, a place where hope seemed to have died long ago. Zyla. The mother was weakened by hunger and injury. She had fought hard to protect her daughter when their world was invaded, but now she was too weak to fight anymore. The harsh sun beat down on them, and the air smelled of rust and burning fuel. It was a place of death, and no one ever came to help. Lyra, the young alien girl, watched her mother with worry in her eyes. She knew that Zyla was doing her best, but the sickness and pain were too much. They had been in the junkyard for weeks, trying to find anything that could help them survive. But no matter how hard they searched, they always came up empty. Every day felt like it might be their last. "Mother, we can't keep going like this," Lyra said, her voice soft but filled with fear. Zyla's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but she managed a weak smile. "We will survive, Lyra. We have to." Her voice trembled, and she clutched her daughter's hand tightly. "You are the future. As long as you are with me, we will find a way." But even Zyla wasn't sure if that was true anymore. Lost hope. The planet was dead, their species was dying, and the junkyard had become their prison. Every night, Lyra would lie awake, thinking about the stories her mother used to tell her. Stories about Earth, a place where humans lived, full of kindness and strength. Zyla had told her that the humans were the ones who would save them if they ever needed help. But Lyra didn't know if those stories were true. How could anyone help them now? Who would care about a broken alien race left to die in a junkyard? One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the junkyard, Lyra looked at her mother. "Mother, do you think the humans will come? Like you?" said Zyla, hesitated. "I don't know, Lyra, but I believe they are out there. I believe there is always hope, even when it seems lost." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. It was a strange noise, unlike anything they had heard before. Lyra froze, her heart racing. She grabbed her mother's hand and Zyla's. Eyes shot open, filled with concern. The footsteps grew closer, the sound of boots crunching against the gravel and debris. Lyra and Zyla hid behind a large piece of metal, hoping whoever it was wouldn't see them. Odd. But they were too weak to run, and they knew there was nowhere to hide. The junkyard stretched for miles, and they had no safe place. The footsteps stopped. A shadow loomed over them, blocking out the last rays of the setting sun. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she looked up to see a figure standing above them. He was tall, with a strong build and weathered clothes. His face was rough, his eyes tired, but there was something about him, a kindness that Lyra couldn't place. He was human. Zyla stood slowly, her body aching with every movement. She held Lyra close, protecting her with her body. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice strained. "I'm Jack," the man said, his voice deep but gentle. "I'm here to help." Lyra didn't know what to think. A human? Here in the junkyard? It didn't make sense. But there was something in his eyes that made her feel safe. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. Zyla's eyes narrowed. "Help! Why would you help us?" Jack took a step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I've been traveling across the galaxy, helping those in need. I've seen the destruction this war has caused, and I can't stand by while people suffer. You need help, and I'm here to offer it." Zyla didn't trust him, but there was something in his words that made her hesitate. She'd been alone for so long, and the thought of trusting anyone, let alone a human, seemed impossible. But this was different. This man had no reason to lie. "Why would you help us?" Zyla asked again, her voice softer this time. Jack knelt down, his eyes meeting Lyra's. "Because I believe in helping others. Because everyone deserves a chance. And you," he said, turning back to Zyla, "deserve to live. You deserve a future just like anyone else." Tears welled up in Zyla's eyes, though she tried to hide them. She hadn't heard those words in so long. She had believed there was no one left who cared, no one who would help. But here was this human, offering them a chance. Lyra watched, her mother closely, seeing the conflict in her eyes. She could see that her mother was still scared, still unsure. But at the same time, she could see the faintest glimmer of hope returning. Zyla took a deep breath, steadying herself. "If you can help us, then we will trust you," she said, her voice firm. "But we need more than just words. We need a way off this planet." Jack nodded. "I can do that. I've been working on a ship. I can take you somewhere safe, somewhere you can start again." For the first time in weeks, Lyra felt a sense of hope rising in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone anymore. Maybe this human could give them the future they had long given up on. As the darkness of night fell around them, Jack extended his hand. "Come with me. It's not much, but it's a start." Zyla looked at Lyra, who nodded eagerly. They had nothing left to lose. Slowly, Zyla reached out, taking Jack's hand. And so, their journey toward a new life began. The junkyard was silent once again, save for the soft rustling of metal and the distant hum of machines. Jack led Zyla and Lyra through the maze of wrecked ships and broken parts. His pace steady, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on his shoulders. Every step they took seemed to carry them further from the world they had known, but closer to an uncertain future. Zyla was still wary, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, just in case danger lurked nearby. Lyra walked beside Jack, her eyes wide with curiosity. She had never been this close to a human before, and the stories her mother had told her about Earth now felt like distant dreams. The idea that a human could be here, offering help, seemed almost impossible. But here he was, solid and real. Leading them out of the junkyard as they walked, Jack turned to them. "You've been through a lot," he said, his voice quiet but kind. "I know it's hard to trust someone you just met, especially in a place like this, but I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." Zyla, still holding Lyra's hand, tightly nodded. "You've said that before. But help from a human. Why would you do that?" Jack paused, taking a breath. "Because I believe in something. I believe that no one should have to suffer like you have. I've seen war-tier planets apart, but I've also seen how people can rebuild. I want to be part of that rebuilding." Zyla didn't respond immediately. She didn't know if she could believe him, but there was something in his eyes, something honest, something she hadn't seen in a long time. She was afraid to trust, but she was also afraid to let go of the only chance she had left. And so, she stayed silent, not wanting to give false hope, but also not wanting to shut out the possibility of a better future. The three of them continued walking, their footsteps echoing through the deserted junkyard. As they reached the edge, a small ship came into view, half hidden behind a pile of scrap metal. It wasn't much, a battered old vessel with rusted panels and broken windows. But to Lyra and Zyla, it was a beacon of hope. Jack smiled. "This is my ship. She's not much to look at, but she'll get us off this planet." Zyla's eyes narrowed. "This ... ship. It looks like it's falling apart. It's not perfect," Jack admitted. "But I fixed it as best I could. We won't be flying in luxury, but we'll be safe." Lyra looked up at the ship, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hardly believe they were about to leave this place, this horrible junkyard. The thought of escaping to somewhere safe filled her with excitement, but a small part of her hesitated. What would it be like out there? Would Earth be as kind as Jack said it was? Would they really be safe? Zyla could see the doubt in her daughter's eyes. She reached down and squeezed her hand. "It's all right, Lyra. We're going to be all right." Jack helped them climb aboard the ship, carefully guiding them into the small, cramped cabin. It smelled of oil and old machinery, but it felt warmer than the cold, empty junkyard. Zyla sat down cautiously, still unsure. She glanced at Jack, watching him work at the control panel. He moved with the ease of someone who had done this many times before, but there was a hint of worry in his brow. "You've been traveling alone?" Zyla asked. Jack didn't look up from his work, but he nodded. "I've been out here for a while, helping where I can. I've seen a lot of things, ... good and bad. But I've never seen anything like this. The war here has taken so much." Zyla didn't say anything, but she understood. She had lost everything to the war, her people, her home, her future. She had been running for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to stop and breathe, to be safe. After a few moments, Jack stood up and turned to them. "We're ready to go. It's going to be a rough ride, but we'll make it." Lyra sat quietly, her hands clenched together in her lap. She wasn't sure what to expect. The ship's engines roared to life, shaking slightly as the ship lifted off the ground. The junkyard, once a place of safety, quickly became a distant memory as the ship rose into the sky. The view outside the small window was breathtaking. As they broke through the atmosphere, Lyra could see the planet below, a dying world filled with the scars of war. It felt like leaving behind a graveyard, but it also felt like freedom, chance to start again. "We'll be heading toward a nearby station," Jack explained. "It's not Earth, but it's a safe place to stop and get supplies. From there, we can decide what's next." Zyla, still unsure, looked out the window. "What's next? What happens when we get to this station?" Jack paused. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time. I can't promise everything will be easy, but I can promise you won't be alone." Lyra watched him carefully, trying to read his face. He was offering them more than just safety. He was offering them hope. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra found herself wanting to believe him. As the ship continued its journey, the stars above them seemed to shine brighter, as though they were welcoming them to a new life. It wasn't going to be easy. Nothing ever was. But they were alive, and they were together. And for the first time, they weren't just survivors. They were hopeful. Zyla glanced at her daughter, her heart heavy with the weight of all they had been through. "We will make it, Lyra. We will." Lyra nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in a long while, she believed her mother. The journey through space was strange for Lyra. She had never been off the planet before, never seen the stars like this. The ship hummed around her, its old engines a constant reminder of how far they had come and how much further they had to go. The world below, once home to so many, was now a distant, dying memory. And yet, Lyra felt a flicker of hope she hadn't known in months. Zyla sat beside her, her eyes closed, as if she were resting, but Lyra could see the worry in her mother's face. Zyla's hands were clenched in her lap, a sign of the tension that still held her. After everything they had been through, it wasn't easy to trust again. Not even Jack, kind as he was, could erase the fear that had lived in Zyla's heart for so long. Jack was busy at the controls, working hard to guide the ship through the empty stretches of space. He had spoken of a nearby station, a place where they could get supplies and decide what to do next. But Lyra couldn't stop thinking about Earth. It was all her mother had ever talked about, a place of kindness and safety. Lyra wanted to believe in it, but she wasn't sure she could. The hum of the ship's engines was soothing, but it couldn't silence the doubts in her mind. What would Earth be like? Was it really as peaceful as her mother had described? Or was it just another far-off dream that would be out of reach? Zyla opened her eyes and turned to her daughter. "Are you all right, Lyra?" Lyra hesitated before nodding. "I'm fine, Mother." Zyla could see the uncertainty in her daughter's eyes. She could feel it too. So the long journey was starting to wear on them both, and the fear of what might happen next was always in the back of their minds. But there was something else she noticed about Lyra, a spark of hope. It was small, but it was there. And that made Zyla want to believe in the future, no matter how uncertain it was. "We'll be safe, Lyra," Zyla said quietly, her voice soft, but full of determination. "This is just the beginning. Things will get better." Lyra turned to her mother, the sadness in her eyes beginning to fade. "I hope you're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She leaned her head against the window, watching the stars as they passed by. It was beautiful in a way, but it also reminded her of how far they were from everything they had once known. Jack turned from the controls and smiled at them. "We'll be there soon," he said. "The station is just ahead." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. They were close. They were almost there. After all the fear, all the running, they were about to reach a place that could offer them a fresh start. as the ship descended toward the station. Lyra could see it coming into view, a large metallic structure floating in the vastness of space. It wasn't a city, not like the ones her mother had told her about. It was more like a spaceport, filled with ships of all kinds, some large, some small, but all showing signs of wear and tear. It was a place where people like Jack could find refuge, where they could get what they needed and keep moving. The ship docked with a soft thud, and Jack stood up, stretching his legs. Here, let's go get some supplies. Zyla stood slowly, her body still aching from the long journey. She looked at Jack, who was already gathering his things. Where exactly are we going? She asked, her voice cautious. There's a market on the station, Jack replied. You can find food, water, and anything else you might need. Not fancy, but it'll do. Lyra followed Jack as he led them out of the ship, her eyes wide as she looked around. The station was busy, with people moving in all directions. Most of them were humanoid, like humans, but there were other species as well. Some had long limbs, others had strange skin colors. It was a mix of cultures and races, all coming together in this small corner of the galaxy. It reminded Lyra of the old stories her mother had told her about the vastness of space, how it was full of different worlds and peoples, each with their own ways of life. They moved through the crowded station, Jack leading the way with confidence, while Zila and Lyra stayed close behind. Lyra kept her head down, trying to stay out of the way. She wasn't used to being around so many people. Back on the planet, it had always been just the two of them, surviving alone.
Ouch!
But now, in this busy station, she felt like a small fish. In a large pond, they stopped at a small stall, where a gruff-looking alien was selling food. Jack exchanged a few words with the seller, and then handed over some credits. The alien woman behind the stall gave them a large bag of food, enough to last them for several days. Thank you, Jack said, his voice polite. Zyla stepped forward, looking at the food.
What is this?
She asked, her eyes scanning the strange items. It's food, Jack said with a smile. It might look different from what you're used to, but it's good. Lyra peeked into the bag and saw dried fruits, strange-looking grains, and a few other things she didn't recognize. She had never eaten anything like this before, but at that moment she realized it didn't matter. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was starting to live again. They moved on to another stall, where they gathered more supplies. As they walked through the market, Lyra felt a sense of wonder. There's so much to see, so much to learn. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was part of something bigger. The world outside the junkyard wasn't as scary as she had thought. It was full of possibilities. As they returned to the ship, Zyla paused for a moment and looked at Jack. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Jack smiled and nodded. You're welcome. I told you I would help. Lyra looked at her mother and then at Jack. For the first time in a long time, she felt like they might actually be able to find a new life. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs. As they boarded the ship and prepared to leave the station, Lyra looked out at the stars again, feeling a sense of peace settle in her heart. The future was still unknown, but for the first time, it didn't feel as scary. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at something better. The journey to the station had given them a brief sense of relief, but now, as the ship rose into the quiet of space once more, a new weight settled on Zilla's shoulders. The market had offered them supplies, but the reality of their situation was still heavy. They had no home, no safe place to go. The planet they had left behind was a graveyard. Though the station had been kind, it was not where they could stay forever. They needed a plan, a place where they could truly start over. Jack sat at the ship's controls, his face focused as he navigated them back into deep space. The small vessel shook slightly with the pressure, but Jack handled it with ease. Zyla and Lyra sat quietly in the cabin, the silence between them thick with thought. Zyla couldn't stop worrying about what was next. The future seemed so uncertain, so far away. I'm thinking about Earth, Jack said, breaking the silence. He didn't look at them, but his voice carried the weight of his thoughts. It's still a long way off, but it might be a good place to go. It's a place where you could find a fresh start. Zila raised her head, her eyes wary. How do you know that Earth will take us in? We're strangers to them. Not sure what kind of future we could have there. Jack glanced at her briefly, his expression soft. I know Earth can be a hard place too, but the people there are different. I believe you'll be safe there. Zila didn't say anything. She had heard stories about Earth, about how humans could be kind, but how could they be sure? They had already been abandoned once, left to die in a junkyard. She couldn't afford to believe in something that might not exist. Lyra, who had been staring out the window, turned to Jack. How will we get there? I mean, how can we even afford the trip? Jack smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. We're going to need a bit of help. There's a place I know about. It's a small rebel group who helps people like you. They don't ask too many questions, and they have the resources to get you somewhere safe. Zila turned sharply toward Jack. You trust them? It's rebels, whoever they are? What if they're just like the others who have taken advantage of us? Jack held up his hands, trying to calm her. I know your fear, Zila. I've been where you are. But these people, he paused, choosing his words carefully. They help those who need it. I've worked with them before, and they've always come through. They're not perfect, but they get the job done. Zila looked at him for a long moment, considering his words. She wanted to believe him, but the fear that had been ingrained in her for so long was hard to shake. And what do they want in? Return? She asked quietly. They don't want much, Jack replied. A favor here and there, maybe some help with repairs or gathering supplies. It's not about money, Zila. It's about helping each other. Zila was silent, weighing the situation. The thought of reaching Earth, of finding safety, was tempting, but the path to get there was still unclear. She didn't know if she could trust Jack completely, but she did know one thing: he hadn't abandoned them. He had shown them more kindness than anyone else in a long time. Maybe it was time to take a chance. We'll do it, Zila said. Finally, her voice firm. We have no choice. We have to try. Lyra's eyes brightened as she heard her mother's decision. She hadn't realized how much she had wanted this. It's a chance to start fresh. It's a chance to find a new home. She wanted to believe in the stories her mother had told her, to believe in a place where they could be safe and free from fear. Jack smiled. Good. We'll head to their base, get what we need, and then make the jump to Earth. It's going to be a tough journey, but we'll manage. The plan was set. It wasn't perfect, and there was still much to be done. But for the first time in a long while, Zila felt like they had a way forward. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a chance. A chance she wasn't going to let slip away as the ship moved toward the rebel base. Lyra stood up, feeling the energy of the moment. She could sense the change in the air, the hope that had begun to grow inside her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She felt like she was living. We're really going to do this. Lyra whispered to herself. Zila looked over at her daughter, her heart swelling with pride and fear. Yes, Lyra, we are. And no matter what happens, we will be together. Jack glanced back at them. That's what matters the most. You're not alone anymore. The ship's engines roared as they broke through the station's atmosphere, heading toward the rebel base. There was still a long way to go, but at least now they had a direction, a goal. And for Zila and Lyra, that was enough to keep going. As the ship entered the black void of space, Lyra leaned against the window, staring out at the stars. They were still far from Earth, still in the middle of a galaxy that seemed vast and empty. But for the first time, the emptiness didn't feel so lonely. It felt full of possibilities. Zila sat beside her, her hand resting gently on Lyra's shoulder. We're going to make it, Lyra. We're going to find a new life. Lyra smiled up at her mother, feeling the warmth of her words settle deep. Inside, she didn't know exactly how everything would turn out, but she knew one thing for sure: they were not alone. They had each other, and that was the most important thing of all. The rebel base wasn't far from the station, but the journey there felt long and tense. Jack kept the ship on course, his face focused as he monitored the ship's systems. Zila sat beside him, her eyes scanning the vastness of space. The quiet hum of the engines filled the cabin, but it wasn't enough to calm the worry that lingered in the air. They were about to face the unknown, a new chapter that might either bring safety or danger. Lyra sat quietly looking out the window, her mind racing with thoughts of Earth. She couldn't stop thinking about what Jack had said about the rebels, about the chance to reach Earth and start over. But her heart also carried the weight of fear. She didn't want to get her hopes up only to have them dashed. She had seen too much loss already. Zyla noticed her daughter's nervousness. She placed a gentle hand on Lyra's arm, offering a comforting smile. "We'll make it, Lyra. Have to trust Jack. He's doing his best." Lyra nodded, trying to hold on to the hope her mother was offering. She wanted to believe it, but a small voice inside her still feared what was to come. As the ship neared the rebel base, the atmosphere grew more tense. They were getting closer to their destination, but Zyla knew that every step they took toward safety also brought them closer to danger. There were those who would do anything to keep people like them from escaping. The warlords who controlled the junkyard were still out there. They would never stop hunting them. "Prepare for landing," Jack said, breaking the silence. "We're almost there." Zilla's heart raced. This was it. They were about to meet the rebels, the people who might offer them a chance at a new life. But at the same time, the fear of being caught by the warlords gnawed at her. She had seen their cruelty firsthand. She knew how far they would go to keep control. The ship descended toward the rebel base, a hidden fortress on a remote planet. It was a place that looked peaceful from afar, but Zyla could sense the tension in the air. There were no guarantees here, no promises. The rebels were a small, secretive group, but they had resources and a network of allies who could help them escape the warlord's grasp. As the ship touched down, Jack turned to Zyla and Lyra. "Stay close," he said, his voice calm but serious. "Don't know who else is here, and it's better to be cautious." Zyla nodded, her hand tightly gripping Lyra's. They had learned to be cautious in their long fight for survival. This moment, though, felt different. It felt like the beginning of something new, something they hadn't dared hope for in a long time. They exited the ship carefully, and the air on the planet felt cooler, fresher. There was a small group of rebels waiting for them, a mix of men and women, some human and some of other species. Their faces were guarded, but not unkind. Jack stepped forward, his hand raised in greeting. "Jack." One of the rebels called out, a tall woman with short dark hair. "You made it, and you brought guests?" Jack nodded. "They need help." "These are Zyla and Lyra. They're looking for a way off this planet." The woman, whose name was Mara, studied Zyla and Lyra for a moment before offering a small smile. "We've heard about your situation. Warlords don't take kindly to refugees." Zyla felt a chill run through her at the mention of the warlords. She had hoped to leave them behind, but their shadow was still looming over them. "Do you have a plan?" Zyla asked, her voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. Mara's smile faded slightly. "We do, but we have to be careful. The warlords are always watching. They have spies everywhere." Lyra shivered at the mention of the warlords. They had been their worst nightmare, the ones who had destroyed their world and left them to die. She wasn't sure she was ready to face them again. "We'll keep a low profile for now," Jack said. "We'll get supplies, get ready for the next step. We're not staying here long." Mara nodded. "Good, we'll need to be quick. That warlords won't wait forever." As the group moved inside the base, Zyla couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into danger. The rebels were kind, but they were also fighting a war of their own. Zyla had learned not to trust easily, especially when it came to people who were involved in such dangerous work. But these rebels, led by Jack, seemed different. They had helped him before, and they were willing to help her and Lyra now. That had to count for something. Lyra stayed close to her mother as they moved through the base, trying to take in the sights around her. There were no fancy comforts here, no luxuries. The rebels lived simply, using what they could to survive. The walls were lined with equipment, and the air smelled of oil and metal. But to Lyra, it felt like a new beginning, a place where they could start fresh. They spent the next few hours gathering supplies, talking to the rebels about their plans. Jack worked with the team, making sure the ship was ready for the next leg of the journey. Zyla watched him, admiring his determination. He had a quiet strength that seemed to guide everyone around him. She had never expected to find someone like him. someone who would risk everything to help them. As night fell, Mara gathered the group in a small room to discuss their next steps. "We have to leave soon," Mara said. "The warlords are closing in. They know we're here, and they'll be coming after us." Zilla's heart sank. She had hoped they would have more time, but the reality was clear. They couldn't stay here long. "We'll leave in the morning," Jack said. "Got a plan? But we'll need to move fast." Zyla nodded, trying to push away the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. They had come this far. They couldn't turn back now. Lyra looked at her mother, her face filled with uncertainty. "What if they catch us?" she whispered. Zyla took her daughter's hand, squeezing it tightly. "We won't let them, Lyra. We'll keep moving forward, together." The warlords' wrath was coming, but so was their hope. And Zila knew that as long as they stayed united, they would find a way to survive. The morning came too soon, and the air felt heavy with tension. Zyla, Lyra, and Jack stood at the edge of the rebel base, looking at the small ship that would take them one step closer to their new life. The night had been filled with hurried preparations and whispered conversations, but the reality of what was ahead weighed heavily on all of them. Zyla watched Jack as he worked on the ship. His face was set in determination, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. He had always been calm, always sure of himself, but now, even he couldn't hide the pressure of what they were about to do. "We're ready," Jack said, turning to them as he wiped his hands on a cloth. "The ship's fueled and the route is plotted. We'll make it to Earth if we don't run into trouble." Zyla nodded, though her heart was heavy. She wanted to believe him, but the fear still lingered. The warlords were never far behind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Is there any chance they'll find us?" she asked quietly, her voice low, as if speaking too loudly might bring danger closer. Jack paused before answering. "There's always a chance, Zyla, but I'm taking every precaution I can. We'll keep our distance from the main routes. They won't be able to track us easily." Lyra, standing by her mother, didn't speak much. Her mind was still caught up in the idea of Earth, of the possibility of a safe place where they could finally live without fear. She wanted so badly to believe in that dream, but every time she closed her eyes, she could still see the wrecked planet, the ruined homes, the memories of the life they had lost. "Are you ready?" Jack asked, his eyes turning to Lyra. "This is the moment. We can't go back after this." Lyra took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside her. "Yes," she said softly, her voice steady. "We're ready." Zyla placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, giving her a small smile. "We've come this far, Lyra. There's no turning back now." With the final preparations made, they climbed aboard the ship, and the engines roared to life. The noise was deafening, and for a moment it felt like the world was about to shake apart. But Zyla held on to Lyra tightly, finding comfort in the steady presence of her daughter. This was it. They were leaving everything behind, taking a leap into the unknown. As the ship began its ascent, the base below them grew smaller and smaller, a fading in the distance. The stars outside the window seemed to stretch on forever, and for a moment, Lyra felt like they were flying toward something beautiful, something full of promise. The sky was so vast, and she knew that they had only scratched the surface of what the universe had to offer, but as they left the planet behind, Zilla's eyes scanned the dark expanse of space, looking for any signs of danger. She knew the warlords wouldn't give up easily. They wouldn't let them escape without a fight. The fear gnawed at her, but she pushed it down. She had to be strong for Lyra. Jack kept his hands steady on the controls, navigating the ship through the emptiness of space. His face was focused, but Zyla could see the weariness in his eyes. He had taken on the responsibility of guiding them to safety, and the pressure of that was clearly weighing on him. "There's a rebel outpost nearby," Jack said, breaking the silence. "We'll stop there for a quick resupply, then we'll head to the next part of our journey. It's not much, but it'll help us stay off the warlord's radar." Zyla didn't say anything. She was grateful for Jack's help, but the uncertainty of the situation made her nervous. Every minute spent in space felt like a minute they could be caught. She wanted to believe that they were safe, but her instincts told her to be ready for anything. Hours passed as they traveled through the quiet void, the ship carrying them further from the warlords and closer to their goal.
Belarus.
The time at the window, watching the stars. She had always been fascinated by them, but now, with everything that had happened, they felt more like a symbol of their hope. They were heading toward something better. They had to be. But as they approached the rebel outpost, the alarms on the ship suddenly blared to life. A loud, shrill sound filled the cabin, and Jack's face went pale. "What is it?" Zila asked, her heart racing. "They've found us," Jack said, his voice tight. "The warlord's there on our tail." Zilla's breath caught in her throat. She had known this moment was coming, but she hadn't expected it to happen so soon. Panic surged through her, but she fought to keep it under control. Lyra was watching her, waiting for her to do something, to say something. Zyla forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. "Jack, what do we do?" Zyla asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "We have to outrun them," Jack replied. "We're going to make a jump, but it won't be easy. We'll have to get past. Their ships first." Zyla nodded, gripping the armrest tightly. She wasn't sure how they were going to escape, but she knew they couldn't give up now. Not when they were so close. "Hold on tight," Jack said, his hands moving quickly over the controls. "It's going to be a bumpy ride." The ship lurched as it sped forward, and Zyla held on tightly as the stars outside the window blurred into streaks of light. The warlord's ships were closing in, but Jack was driving the ship with all his skill. Weaving through space with incredible speed. "Almost there," Jack muttered, sweat dripping down his face. "Just a little further." Zilla's heart was pounding in her chest. They were so close. She could see the rebel outpost ahead, a small station hidden in the depths of space. But the warlords weren't giving up. Their ships were right behind them, firing weapons that cracked against the ship's shields. "We're not going to make it," Lyra cried, fear in her voice. "We will," Zyla shouted back. "Hold on, Lyra!" The ship shook violently as a blast hit their shields, but Jack kept going. They were just a few seconds away from the outpost when the ship lurched one last time, throwing them all forward. The lights flickered, and for a moment Zyla feared the worst. But then the ship passed the warlord's ships, and they were out of range. The rebel outpost was just ahead. "We did it," Jack said, his voice shaky but relieved. "We're safe, for now." Zyla closed her eyes, her body still trembling from the close call. They had made it, but the journey wasn't over yet.
Wait.
We're still a long way from Earth, and danger still lurked in the shadows.